So thank you, Luis, and have a good job.
So yeah, first of all, how is everyone? You're not sleeping after lunch? Okay, so a little bit about myself. Actually, the webinar was not about best practices; it was about performance tuning on Alfresco. So my name is Luis Cabaceira. I joined Alfresco 4 years ago, more or less, as a senior consultant. My background comes from, I came from OpenText before I joined Alfresco. And when I got invited to join, I was already in love with the technology, so it was a huge yes. And I haven't regret ever since, because I'm truly passionate about Alfresco from a technology standpoint. When I started to build my presentation on Alfresco best practices, I wanted to give you guys everything that I had. And so I ended up like 100 slides presentation, and well, I thought, well, it's going to be impossible to give 100 slides in a PowerPoint. And well, I guess you can still hear me. I don't have sound anymore. That's fine. So I decided, and I changed my presentation like 50 times, for making it shorter. And then one of the times I recorded myself, and the presentation was all text, because, well, I want them to take home something that they can refer to after, and they can read the best practices and apply it. So I don't care about the pictures. I'm going to make it as text. And I recorded myself doing this presentation, and when I heard myself speaking, I said, oh my God, you're going to bore them to death. And the presentation is after lunch, so they're going to sleep the whole way. So I changed it again, make it really smaller, so it's like 24 slides, more or less, and I hope I can cover them all. But I also did a blog post, which is very, very big, and that can cover all of these topics and subtopics in detail. So make sure you refer to community.alfresco.com, and Luis Cabaceira, you can see my full presentation and also the blog post on top of this. And let's get started. So my goal here is to try to finish my speech, which I normally can't. You know, Bindu, you've been there. But yeah, let's get to the chase. So I've introduced myself. I have a couple of certifications that are valid to practice my consulting job, and I also am an active blogger in community.alfresco.com, and I have a huge community and open source mindset. So let's start with the basics. This seems very obvious. Use only a supported stack, but you cannot imagine how many customers and big customers that I've visited that are not running a supported stack. Either they are running a different JVM, they are running a different version of the application server. And when I review their architecture, and I say, well, you know, you shouldn't be using this version of Tomcat. It's not listed on the supported platforms metrics. I say, yeah, but it works. It does work, but Alfresco invests a lot on the quality assurance process, a lot of time, money, and effort of a lot of people to guarantee that the platform works perfectly on top of that specific version. So when you choose to use a different JVM or a different version of the application server or any other architecture component, you're facing a huge risk that maybe you don't face the problems now, but you'll face them in the future. And once you try to open a support case with a non-supported stack, the first thing support will say is, well, you need to replicate this on a supported stack. So use only a supported stack. The second one also seems very obvious. Own your code. Your integrators may not be here tomorrow. What does this mean? I also have visited a lot of customers that they have done their implementations with integrators or any other companies that they subcontracted to implement their business cases. It was working back then, but then these companies either terminated or they are not working with this integrator anymore, and they don't own the code. They only have the amps or the compiled code, but they do not have access to the source. So when there's upgrades, changes on the APIs and all, they don't know what to do. So as a first or a second golden rule, make sure you own your code, or at least have someone on your team that can check out and compile the code that basically builds your business. Recognize your team. Your team is your strength. For me, this is one of the most important golden rules. I've seen most of the best successful projects that I've seen towards my consulting practices on customers, they all have a very, very talented and effective team. And this team, they are recognized. This is why they stay. So if you don't recognize your team and you don't cherish the good team that you have, you end up having to hiring or to build a new team. For me, it's all about the people. When you have a good set of people, you should cherish them because they are ultimately who drives your business. And I don't believe, back in the past when I was working as a programmer, my team, the whole team, we were called the Code Monkeys. And they say, well, you know, we just do the whole thought and then we give this to the Code Monkeys and they implement it. But they didn't recognize us. So that made the whole team to disperse and to change, and that led to problems. So for me, it's all about the people. Having a good team and recognizing a good team is very, very important. Maintaining awareness of the Alfresco service packs is also important. When you are in a specific Alfresco version, you should know that Alfresco releases service packs on a 3 months basis or every couple of months, and these service packs addresses specific areas of the code that either are addressing a specific bug or that needs to be improved for some reason. Maintaining awareness of these service packs and applying those service packs to your deployment will get you on the safe side. And we'll guarantee you that you're running the very last version of the code with all the fixes. You might not be suffering from the problem that this service pack is addressing right now, but you might suffer from it in the future. So make sure you maintain awareness of the service packs and you apply those service packs to your project. And also, don't be afraid to embrace changes in thinking and technology. What you develop today as a solution for your problem, someone in your team might come up with a better idea in the future. And normally what I see is people are reluctant to change. Oh no, we have already done this way, it's working more or less. But believe me, you shouldn't be afraid to change and to embrace the new ways of doing things. There's constantly new things, and even the platform is evolving, so that's for me also best practice. One of the most important components of the architecture in Alfresco is the database. So Alfresco is a highly transactional system. It depends a lot on your database. And no matter if you have, let's say, if you have a very good team of DBAs and skilled DBAs, but the Alfresco administrator is someone else, this guy, the administrator, needs to know what's happening in the database, no matter how good the DBAs may be. So he needs for me to ask for reports on the database. How is the database growing? Making sure that the statistics are being rebuilt, because when the database is not working, nothing will work. And one of the basic rules is to maintain the communication round trip between the cluster nodes and the database should be below 2 milliseconds. I don't know how many customers that I visited that they had network issues on communicating to the database, and this was affecting the whole deployment. Everything was slow. And well, yeah, but and then they say, well, but I talked with my DBAs and they said the database is responding okay. Yeah, it was responding okay, but the problem was in the network. So making sure that the communication between the nodes and the database is below 2 milliseconds is very, very important. If it's above that, it means there's some kind of latency that needs to be addressed. This is, I've seen this situation on many, many big customer accounts, and it's very important because it affects the whole deployment. What else? Making sure that you can monitor the slow queries for your specific use case. Every use case is different, and every use case is generating different kind of queries to the database. Maintain awareness of what are the slow queries that you are executing against your database. Run query plans to verify what are the query plans for the slow queries that you are running. And even creating new indexes to make those slow queries faster will have an overall impact on your global performance. So for me, the database is the most important component on the architecture. And of course, updating the database statistics is very, very important. Choosing the right database engine is also something that needs to be taken into consideration when you start an Alfresco project. If for smaller projects, it's okay basically to choose any from our supported platforms metrics. But when the project becomes really big, or you're expecting a big amount of concurrency that will lead you to have a lot of cluster nodes, you should have in consideration that each one of those cluster nodes will require a database pool of, by default, 275 connections to database. If you sum all of these, let's say for 4 or 5 nodes, it's a huge amount of concurrent connections that your database may need to hold. And that, most of the times, will require you to have a database that can scale. Not just scaling up, as giving more resources to the database, but at a certain point, the databases cannot scale up anymore, and you need to scale out. And there are database engines that scale out way better than others. There are some examples on the screen. You can see Amazon, the Aurora, something that we used on our 1 billion documents benchmark that we've done recently. Oracle RAC, most of the big customers with the biggest deployments that I know are running Oracle RAC, but there are also cheaper solutions in the market, such as MariaDB, based on Galera, MySQL, and even PostgreSQL that I think there are some representatives here that is highly used on the community and is, I think, default on the community installation. So plan, choose, and size your database properly. The application server. This is also very important. When you install Alfresco out of the box, we install it using Tomcat, but there's a lot of choices that you can make in terms of application server. We have customers using JBoss and customers using any others, but the main rule here is your repository can get easily filled up with requests if you assign too many threads to your application server. And what people normally tend to do is, okay, my concurrency will increase. I know that next month I will have 200 concurrent users. What will I do? I would say 70% of the administrators let me give more threads to my application server. And this is wrong. I've seen much more performance increases by reducing the number of threads that will guarantee you that each thread will get access to the resources that it needs, so basically a database connection and a CPU cycle, than the other way around, which is giving more threads. What happens on this scenario? When you give a lot of threads to your application server and the server cannot cope with all this load, the threads, they stop, but they wait for the resource. They are standing there waiting for CPU cycle, and if you do a thread dump, you'll see, well, I have 400 threads, but 200 are in a wait state. Yeah, they are waiting for either the database or a CPU cycle. So it's much more beneficial, and from my experience, to reduce the number of threads and to have a benchmark. Well, with this number of threads, my application server can perform. And if you need to scale out, spin up another node is way better than assigning more threads to your application server. The amount of RAM that you assign to Alfresco is also very important to avoid having a lot of input and output reading from this. But assigning too much memory is also counterproductive because it can lead to huge garbage collection cycles. So it's all about achieving a balance on the amount of RAM that you assign to your application server so that you can guarantee that your garbage collection is healthy and that you have enough RAM to hold the number of objects that you need so that your application server can function properly. This is one of my favorites and something that have a really big impact when you do it properly. When you know when and where and how are the processes occurring in your architecture, you have the power to divide and conquer. What does this mean? This means that you can divide the load on the several layers of your architecture wisely in order to achieve a balanced performance. Let's think, for example, as you all know, Alfresco runs a series of scheduled tasks, and you can develop your own scheduled tasks. But you can also offload these scheduled tasks to a specific server, and then you free the front-end servers that are serving user requests from that specific task. Something else, for example, if you have huge ingestion processes and you can have a dedicated ingestion node, you can offload this node or have this node specialized for bulk ingestions and remove this node from the cluster and have your load balancer distributing the user loads only on the front-end servers. The power to divide and conquer is, for me, what had the best results in terms of the division of labor. Overall, what you should take home is try to have a balance and know that you can offload specific tasks of Alfresco to specific nodes of your architecture. It's all about balance. In terms of content modeling, which one of you has not developed an Alfresco content model before? Anyone? So everybody has developed a content model here. Yeah, all technicals. So that's good. So there's a set of practices that you can adopt that can make your life easier. Basically, try to index just the bare minimum of properties that you know that you need to access your content, and also have in consideration that you don't need to have all of your properties declared as index. You can leverage the transactional metadata queries to access those property values, and for that you don't need those properties to be marked as indexed. But the tendency normally is, well, I'm building my content model, let me mark everything as indexed, because I know that I will be able to search for those properties afterwards. This, although it may seem a good idea, at the long, historically, or at the big run, you will see that this is not actually the best practice. The best practice is to making sure that you are indexing only what you need in your business to be searchable. When you're designing a content model, for me it's very important to use aspects. Aspects are a very flexible technology in Alfresco, and those give you the ability not only to reuse them across different types, but also to engage in different behaviors in the repository based on the presence of certain aspects. So for me, using aspects is a best practice when designing a content model. Don't repeat the same properties on your content module. You can have different types, but for example, when you have different types and those types have properties that have the same constraints and have the same meaning, for example, the title. You can have 2 or 3 types of documents that of document types that all require a title. Instead of defining 3 titles on the type, reuse an aspect with the title so that the index is kept smaller and better. Use root types on your model. Using the root types will make your life easier to separate your solution model from the other existing types, and you can implement policies and search based on these root types. So basically a set of golden rules. Leverage but do not change the Alfresco out-of-the-box content module. As you all know, we have an out-of-the-box content module that you can reuse. For example, if you need a property called title, you can just use CM title. And we have already a Java class that you may know that you can refer to the QNames of all these properties in the Alfresco default out-of-the-box model. So leverage it, but don't change it. Okay? So use aspects when you can. They are really flexible and provide a lot of extra possibilities. And create multiple content models to keep your content modeling in order. Don't just throw everything into the same content model. Make sure you use, if you need more than one, make sure you use both, use many as you need. And implement a Java class that corresponds to your model. As you all know, that class that I was referring before in Alfresco, it's called content model.java, has all the QNames for the out-of-the-box properties that are in the Alfresco default model. You should do the same when you define your specific custom content models, because it will help you on the coding, and it's much more clear, and it's the best practice. And overall, remember Solar eventual consistency. Don't try to search for properties that they are not yet indexed, and have this in consideration when you're coding. So for the repository modeling and design, when you are designing your repository, with this I'm referring to the folder hierarchy, how you organize your node tree in your repository. It's important to know some constraints and what can be factors that can affect your performance. One of each being, for example, limiting the number of groups hierarchy to 5. Groups hierarchy means group inside a group, inside a group, inside a group. Because when Alfresco needs to browse or to search for nodes into a specific place, if you have a big, deep group hierarchy, that will make ACL check a lot difficult and will make the process slower of ACL evaluation. Limiting the number of nodes on a specific parent node is also something that you should have in consideration. Be aware that when you're browsing in Share, or even using an API, if you need to browse a specific folder, what Alfresco does is first get me a list of all the nodes, and then each one of the nodes, it will need to evaluate the permissions to see if the user making the request has access to this node. If you have more than 2,000 or 5,000 or 10,000, you can imagine that this becomes slower and slower and slower as more nodes as you may have on a specific parent node. And a lot of customers that I've visited, mainly the customers that come from big migrations, they tend to do the migrations as the content were on the source. And this brings problems related to this. They end up with a lot of nodes on the same parent node, and then they cannot browse, Share times out during browsing, and other problems that are related with having a huge number of nodes under the same parent nodes. Also limit the folder hierarchy depth. This is also very, very important. It's all about basically it's all about organizing your folder structure in such a way that Alfresco can perform. Keep a low range on user groups memberships. So think if you really need your user to belong to 10,000 groups. And also, and this is also very important, and I've seen big customer accounts synchronizing their full LDAP. Because, well, we want to give opportunity to all of my users to use Alfresco, but when you end up seeing how many users are really using it, it's like 10% or 5%, but synchronizing all of your LDAP tree is a problem, because you end up with a lot of authorities inside Alfresco, and all of the queries that depend on looking into these authorities will be slow. So the overall Alfresco performance will suffer from this. So make sure that you only synchronize parts of users on your LDAP that you really need on your repository and that are going to use and log in into Alfresco and are participating or collaborating on document management operations. Removing orphan, this is about repository management still. Removing orphan content is very important. When you delete your content and this content is empty from the trash can, it will end up on the deleted content store. And Alfresco never physically removes this content from the disk. So as a maintenance best practice, make sure that if you don't need those binary files, you go there and delete it, because it will free space on your disk that you may need for other purposes. Review the cron expressions on your scheduled tasks. Make sure that you know what scheduled tasks are executing, and if you can, offload the execution of these scheduled tasks to parts of to areas of the day when the users are not working, so off business hours. That's good, and you also save on resources. So performance best practices. This is also something that is going to help you on the long run. Alfresco, when you install it, it has a lot of services enabled by default, but depending on your use case, you might not be needing to use these services. And if you don't need, disabling is the best thing you can do, because you're saving a lot of resources for those resources to being used and applied to what you really need to. And some examples are on the screen. For example, you can disable the thumbnails. Those are enabled by default when you upload something into Alfresco. It generates a thumbnail. If you don't need them, you can disable. You can disable user quotas, because checking the user quotas is somehow expensive to Alfresco. Disabling the activities feed. The activities feed is something that is also occurring very frequently in Alfresco. If you don't need or don't leverage the activities feed, make sure you disable it. And you can disable much more things depending on your use case. Make sure you check the blog post. There's a big list there. And I'm running out of time, so I'm trying to catch up here. Memory and garbage collection is also very important. To keep an eye on your garbage collector. Make sure you enable the garbage collector logs, and then you review those logs on a frequent basis, because reviewing the garbage collector and optimizing the way your garbage collection is working can lead to huge performance gains, and also give you an indication on how the memory is being used, and if the memory usage is healthy, and can detect also some memory leaks that you may need to address. Seen a lot of customers, when they see that the memory is highly occupied, they tend to throw more memory and hide the memory leak, but that's not what you should be doing. You should be looking at what is causing the memory leak, addressing this problem, and removing it from the equation. JVM configuration. This I can skip this because I'm running out of time. But basically, what to take home here is make sure you enable the heap dump on memory, on out of memory error. This is very important. We have a lot of customers that they face out of memory errors and only in production, and they open a support ticket, and then we go, well, can you replicate this on any other environment? No. Can you give me so I can know what happened to your memory during this out of memory? No, because they haven't had this enabled. It's nothing much, but it has a big impact when you're suffering from out of memory error, because it gives us the opportunity to analyze and find the root cause so you can prevent it. And you don't want to have another out of memory in production because you didn't have this enabled and you didn't check the root cause. Monitoring is also something that on a lot of customers that I visit is not taken into full considerations. Monitoring is very important because it gives you the ability to know what is happening on the several layers of your architecture. It helps you troubleshoot, but it also helps you to define and to know your scalability needs and what do you need to scale and where. If you have an accurate monitoring plan and you can access these logs and this monitoring data on a regular basis, you will know when you need to scale before you need to scale. And that's really important. Some best practices on solar. One of the most important for me that can contribute to increase and maximize solar performance are the speeds of the disks. Make sure you have local and fast disks on solar, SSD or RAID. Realize that you can turn the merge factor. 25 is ideal for indexing and 2 is ideal for search, so you can achieve a balance here depending if your use case is depending more on search or on indexing. Avoid path search queries. Tune your transformations. Make sure you have transformations timeout, and make sure you understand what is causing your transformations to take the long times to occur. So, but basically what is important here is make sure you have timeout on transformations, because transformations can really slow down the system when they are not occurring properly. For example, I remember one case when there's no transformer for a specific MIME type, so that it cannot have text extraction from this MIME type. Alfresco will wait until the timeout occurs before throwing that thread away. And if you have a timeout, it will really help to make your system stable and healthy. Closely monitor the solar JVM as the same as I told for the repository, and make sure you use sharding from 40 million documents onwards. Sharding can divide your index into chunks, can make your indexing process much smoother, and can increase the search response time because the indexes are smaller, and as you can imagine, searching on a smaller index is much faster than to search on a very, very big index. So leverage solar sharding as much as you can, especially if you have more than 40 or 50 million documents. Below that, doesn't make much sense to engage on solar sharding according to my personal perspective. Make sure you analyze your indexing process if you can. Plug in a profiler and realize what's happening when you're indexing for your specific use case. This is also very important. I know that I'm running out of time, but make sure you have a large enough disk cache for solar. If your index takes like 50 gigabytes, you should have a disk with 100 gigabytes. So another 50 gigabytes space. This is the disk cache that solar will need for the merging process and to perform on a safe way. And try to keep your index small. It's very, very, very easy to provide and to perform housekeeping in terms of solar indexes, and you can even blacklist some MIME types that you don't need to index, and that will help you to make your index small, therefore faster to search. Security best practices. Perimeter security. Well, you can make sure that you set up your firewalls properly, and you can even isolate your repository from users accessing your repository directly. And remember that you do have a proxy in share, that you can access the repository APIs without exposing the repo itself to the end users. Make sure you change the default passwords for the Alfresco admin password, and also make sure you don't run Alfresco as root. It can present big problems, and can also hide some of the problems that might occur by running Alfresco as root. And you can use SSL for all Alfresco services, disabling the guest user. All of these are security best practices that you can also check on my blog post. Developing best practices. Make sure you use version control and use branches. This is sometimes, well, this is obvious for all of you. Of course, we all use, but believe me, there are a lot of people that don't use either version control, and then they don't use branches. Some people, they use version control, but everybody goes on the master. No, it's okay, because we have a very small team. We are only 5 committing to the master branch, and this results in a lot of confusion. It's a mess. So make sure you use branches. Spin up a new branch for every new development, and then you do pull requests. That's the way to do it. Don't do it any other way. Make sure you use version control. Make your unit tests mandatory. This is also sometimes forgotten, but really guys, it's really important to have unit tests. Unit tests are the guarantee that your code works. And you can guarantee that your code works before you send it to any environment or you deploy it to any environment or production. So make sure you enforce unit tests as mandatory. Close your streams and result sets. I can say, at least 40% of the customers that I visited, they are using the lowercase beans variants of Alfresco. And all of them, they say, well, it's faster because we are overriding security. And it's really not, and it's not transaction safe. So when we say use the uppercase bean versions, when you do your string bean wiring, we meant it. Use the uppercase versions. They are transactional safe, and they are the only way for you to guarantee that your code will work inside a transaction, especially a heavily transactional system. Use transactions properly, so we constantly enforcing in our tickets and when we address customer code reviews to leverage the retrying transaction helper. This will guarantee that your transaction will actually occur. If it fails now, it will retry until that transaction is concluded. Failing to do so may lead to losing transactions and to future problems on your... how many time do I have? No more time. Okay, I almost did it. So I had a couple more on caching best practices and content injection, but you can make sure that you check my blog post. Everything is really detailed there, and I'm making myself available for each and every one of you to come up to me directly if you want to talk about any of these topics in more detail. It's 30 minutes. It's for me really short to address the best practices. I've done the best I can. I think I speak really fast. English is not my mother language, but I tried my best, so thank you very much. And I think
you did a great work. Thank you. What about, I'm sorry, with the following guys, what about one question? Are you agree on that? One question?
Sure. Any questions? Wow.
So you are
I don't see anybody sleeping. That's good.
Very fast.
But no
Thank you
questions.
again, Luis. It's amazing talk. Please raise your hands and
Thank you.
thank you.